Geocachomaniacs.
GeoGearHeads.
Welcome to episode 304 of the GeoGearHeads. Tonight, along with our amazing host, Daryl W4, we have a very special guest from Geocaching HQ to help us talk about guidelines. Daryl, would you introduce our guest?
Sorry, yes, I
Whose
will.
cue is that?
I am getting so distracted by the shiny chat room object over here.
Sorry.
So we have to blame that one on Limax because he was distracting me with his talk of avoiding Evernote. Mostly because I was just having a conversation about how I avoid Evernote now myself, just about 4 hours ago. Anyway.
So our special guest from HQ tonight
Yes, thank you.
the only Chris Ronan, otherwise known as Rockshot. Chris, thank you for joining us. It's always a privilege to have you here.
Well, that's very nice of you to say. I think you're overstating it a bit, but it's always a pleasure to talk with you. It's been a little while, I feel like, since we've talked. So it's a pleasure to be back with you guys again.
You know, let's just drop the topic and let's just catch up. How's it been going? Have you found any geocaches?
I actually retired from geocaching. I don't know if I told you guys that.
It doesn't surprise me though, because you weren't that good at it.
Yeah, no, I wasn't. That's the truest thing you will say tonight, Chris, is that I'm not very good at. People actually don't believe that. They say, "Oh, you found X many caches. You must be." I've always been very open about the fact that I'm not good at finding geocaches. I can get to them. I'm very good at physically getting to a place. But finding them, I'm not the one that you want to bring along for that hard D5 that nobody else has been able to find, because I'm just going to come along and hope somebody else gets it so I can log it. You know, that's no, but it's been a great summer. I actually just got back from a trip up to the Northeast and finished off my states, which was yeah. So I was really excited about that. I got my last 9 states on that trip.
You could probably get 12 in a day in the Northeast without even trying.
You probably could. Yeah, I was. I don't know if the rental car company was real happy with me when the number of miles I put on the car, but hey, that's their fault for giving me free unlimited miles. So I took it
over unlimited.
Right, that's right. So I took full advantage of that part of their system and got my 9 states, and yeah, it was a great trip. It was a beautiful time to be there. You know, it was funny watching I don't know if you guys have been to that part of the country during the fall, but they have, like, on the weather during the news, they've actually got the fall foliage map, you know, so they're showing like the area that's in peak foliage and the area that's not quite there yet. Is kind of like, you know, I grew up in the Midwest looking at storm maps, and this was like that except for foliage, which I'd never seen before. So yeah, and so it's just beautiful seeing the leaves turn, and it was a great time of year to be there. And as you know, Chris, we've still got we're getting a few extra days of sun here in the Northwest before. I thought winter had its hooks into us last week, but it looks like it loosened its grip for just a couple days. So I think we're gonna use this weekend to head over to Spokane and take. I don't like driving over the pass during the winter. I haven't even actually. I shouldn't say I don't like it, but as in that makes it sound like I've done it before and I didn't like it. I've actually never done it. I'm so afraid of the idea that I just don't even want to try. So it's kind of like I guess this was in September. We went to Montana, which we didn't have that state, and we flew into Missoula and then drove over to Helena to do the Geo Tour. And we were driving from Missoula to Helena, and you have to go over one of the passes. And this was like September 15th, and it was snowing. They got like 3 inches of snow that day. And it was a little bit sketchy, and there's an earth cache on the pass. And so I'm like pulling over on the side of the road. There's 3 inches of snow, snow's falling. I'm like, this is September 15th. This wasn't supposed to, happen. But so yeah, see, you asked me about caching, and now I'm babbling on. I could talk for a while, but
I have to absolutely agree with you. The weather right now is spectacular, and
yeah.
I think we have better fall colors than we've had in years.
Yeah, I actually noticed that today. I was looking out the window, and it really did seem like sometimes it feels like in the Northwest you kind of go straight from summer straight to winter, and you never really see any color change.
Mm-hmm.
It just goes straight from green to nothing is there anymore on some of the trees. But yeah, it's kind of nice. There's definitely some color that I haven't noticed in my first 3 winters here. So
Okay.
this will be my 4th coming up. But so yeah, the long story short, it's been a really fun few months of caching and trying to do as much as you can before the winter kind of keeps you at bay at least a little bit.
A little bit, then those park and grabs in the Walmart parking lots aren't looking so bad, are they? It's like, yeah, I think they'll get one of those.
Yeah, not so much hiking into the mountains anymore, but a lot more of the waterside stuff.
Yeah, you've got 3 hours of sunlight to go hiking.
Right.
You can do that.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, I definitely prefer those nice crafty hides, the really nice walk in the woods, the challenging puzzle boxes, but on those like 2-degree days with the wind blowing and the snow's coming down, it's like, where's that LPC?
Right.
The one I can get without taking my gloves off.
Yeah. Because it's like I've been locked up inside for over a week and I can't do anything. Let me get a cache.
That's right. That's right.
Limax, though, says he's been in New England when the foliage has fallen, and it is very slippery.
Yes.
Yeah, I could see that.
Mm-hmm.
I know that problem well.
And he also adds that he was briefly in 3-digit temperatures. It's been hot down there.
Well, at least that's only in Fahrenheit.
Oh, that's true. Not in Kelvin.
Ooh.
I see somebody asked if I got first mass, and yes, I did get first mass. In fact, I was there with my boss. We were in Maine for a couple days, and on the way back to Boston for the flight back to Seattle, I made her I forced her to stop at first mass. Most of what we did that day was helping her with her Jasmer, and so we only found, I think, 4 or 5 caches the entire day, but all of them helped her with her Jasmer, and she didn't need first mass for her Jasmer, but I said, no, we're going to first mass. So yeah, that trip I was doing a lot of older stuff, and actually speaking of Jasmer, I maxed out my I've gone as far as I can go on Jasmer now. I got to quadruple. So
that's impressive.
So I got to figure something else out now to obsess myself with. Yeah, now that I've gone as far as I can with that.
Though.
Yeah, it was fun, and it was funny because it got to where I was at 3, and the last thing I needed was November 2000 to get to 4. So going into this, whatever day it was, a Wednesday or a Thursday, I needed one more with November 2000. And I got 3 November 2000s that day. It's just kind of, there's a big cluster of them up there and in the the New York area. So yeah, that was a really fun trip.
I can imagine. But it occurs to me we've been talking for like almost 10 minutes now, and we haven't even mentioned the topic of guidelines.
Oh, who wants to talk about guidelines?
I know.
It's like going to the dentist.
Right. We just skip it. We just chit chat for the whole hour because
I'd be fine with that if that's what we want to do. or if we want to spend 5 minutes on it and then go back to chit-chatting, but yeah, it's a little bit like, it's like, oh, we got to talk about, all right, talk about guidelines. But it was a little bit like, oh, let's go to the dentist tomorrow. Nobody thinks like that. You're like, oh, I got to go to the dentist. That's kind of how you feel about talking about guidelines.
I mean, yes, people are coming in and I'm making money.
Yes, but unfortunately, it's one of those necessary things. If you don't, go to the dentist, your teeth fall out. So I guess if we don't talk about the guidelines, your caches fall out.
Maybe. Yeah, that's probably a good analogy.
Yeah, probably is, actually.
You're so nice. Anyway, so the guidelines were recently changed, as we had mentioned on a previous show, about 2 months ago, I think now.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been some tweaks to those guideline changes, and that's one of the reasons we've waited so long to get you on, is let things kind of settle down and figure out where they actually have changed after this major overhaul. But the nice thing is the new page is, a page that's much easier to read with the links to clarify that kind of stuff. So it's a much easier to consume page, but it has stirred up a lot of confusion.
Yeah, there were, as you said, a big part of it was about making them easier to read and understand. I mean, there were some changes and clarifications along the way too, but more than that, I think if we were to somehow quantify how it all changed, I think more of it went into improving the layout, making the text just more clear. I think we reduced the number of words by something like 15%. One of the things that we look at is reading grade level, and you can take a document, and I wasn't the one doing this, but you can essentially have it calculated to see what the reading grade level is for a document. So, and it goes from first grade to whatever, just like our grade system here in the U.S. And I want to say that before it was a 12th grade reading level, and now it's something like 8th grade. And I don't think we put that anywhere because it sounds a little bit like, I don't know, like we're dumbing it down, and that's not what it is. It's just you want people to be able to look at a document and have it be kind of so obvious that it's really easy to digest it. And the higher the grade level, the more difficult it is to digest the information. So we were able to make that happen as well. What else? Move some of the stuff to the help center, and then there were some changes and clarifications. But the main goal of it, I think it's fair to say, was to take that document that could be really overwhelming for people, and some people would look at it and treat it like a software agreement that you just click, yes I understand, yes I agree, without actually taking time to read the stuff. And hopefully now, the way that it's presented, it will be more likely that people will actually read the information before they put out that cache.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And you were mentioning the grade level. When I was in my writing classes, they were always talking about, generally when you're writing news stories, you want them to be at a 5th grade level.
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of, you have these target levels for anything that you're writing. And for public consumption, generally you don't want to have it too high, because people tend to stop reading and go somewhere else, unless it's, a novel or, like a nonfiction book that you're really into.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to go and read something at a 10th or 12th grade level and stick with it.
Yeah, and if we could have worded it just like that, we probably would have put that into the blog when we announced the stuff. We actually, I think we had reduced grade level from 12th to 8th. And then I said, you know what, let's not even put that there, because people aren't going to understand. We need to be able to explain what that means. And it was, you couldn't do it in a really concise way. I didn't feel.
Yeah.
So I thought it was just better to leave it out. But what you said. It's basically what we were going for.
Yeah, it's easier. There you go. That's concise.
It's just easier. Right.
More understandable, more universal.
Yeah.
But there were a couple of points that kept coming up after the change, and one of them was the original version kind of made it sound like you were allowed to bury caches, but that's been amended now.
Yeah, we did clarify that, and it's funny. I mean, the process of doing this update was a very long one, and it wasn't something that was done in a vacuum. We involved the reviewer community and got a lot of feedback from them, and you feel like once you've done that with, I mean, dozens and dozens of people have had their eyeballs on this, and you feel like it's right where you want it to be, and then you put it out there and it's out for a day, and people start saying, wait, does this mean you can bury a cache? I'm like, no, of course it doesn't mean that. So we got to go in and so even though you feel like you've got it just right, once you put it out to the whole community, of course folks are gonna bring things to your attention, and we did feel like that was a fair point that people made, was that reading this, it looks like it's okay for people to go out and dig for caches, and that was clearly not the end. We felt like it was pretty clear that wasn't our intention. We did make a clarification just with the buried guideline in general, but we didn't mean to clarify it to the point where people could go out with shovels and start digging for the cache that was just put out by somebody. So yeah, hopefully the clarification that's out there now is a lot more clear than what we had originally had.
Well, the whole subject title says "Do not bury." That kind of eliminates any doubt right there.
Right.
Well, yeah, you would hope, but but you never know. I mean, the clarification that we did make to that was saying that, at least putting it in writing, that if you have property owner permission, that who gives you explicit permission to create a hole to place a cache, that's an exception that can be made to the general guideline that you shouldn't make a hole in the ground or to place a cache. So we, of course, we know that, for instance, gadget caches are increasingly popular, and people that have to create a hole to put a post in the ground. If you read the guidelines to the letter before, that those weren't really technically allowed. I mean, but what we realized was that, if the property owner gives permission for that, then that's something that could be allowed on the website. And but at the same time, we wanted to make it clear that just because you can create a hole like that doesn't mean that people can go digging to reach the cache. We still wanted to make it clear that that was something that is not kosher with the guidelines.
But if the hole already exists in the ground, you can use it, correct?
What's that again?
If the hole already exists. If, there was a fence pole that had been removed and there was a nice hole in the ground, you could put a cache in there. If you didn't dig the hole?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say blanket,
right.
Deal. I mean, certainly there are cases like that where that's a possibility. I mean, it tends to be a kind of a chicken and the egg thing. Sometimes people will say, "Oh no, there was a hole here. I didn't do anything," and like, but then you'll actually see pictures of it, and you'll think that doesn't look like a natural, thing that just happened. So, but certainly there are cases where that is, a possible deal.
Team Mavage says, Chris, it's called a cave. A hole in the
right.
That's a big hole in the ground.
Yes. In certain cases, a cave can be just probably natural. Probably natural.
Might be natural. Good guess.
Yeah, I actually had a cache that buried itself, essentially. It was a challenge cache that was only found once in a while. And apparently there had been enough flooding that it buried itself, and I had to actually, I found like the corner sticking up out of the mud. When I went to check on it, like, a year after it was last found.
I did that. I had a challenge cache that mystery cache that was in a nice nook of a tree, and because it didn't get found much, the tree grew around it.
Oh,
Like, I
wow.
could
Oh yeah,
thing
yeah.
out here
Wow.
before, I hurt this before the tree gets hurt because it's got a chunk of metal in it. But yeah, it took a little work to get it out there. And somebody says, I found it, but I can't get it out. Yeah, right. Oh yeah, that's stuck in there. Let me pull this out.
Yeah, that happened to one of our hiders over here too, with a cache not far from my office.
Yeah, and here in the States, I think the main case that we're all aware of is the gadget caches, but then there are other parts of the world, and there was a situation, I forget which country it was in Europe, where uh, basically a, a landowner had given a cacher permission to place a cache, but he insisted that it be buried because otherwise the cattle would eat the cache. And so he said, if you're going to put, I would love for you to have a cache here, but you're going to have to put it underground, because if you don't, it's going to be dangerous to my cattle. So there's odd situations like that out there, and that's part of the thing with these guideline updates that we do every so often is over time the game evolves, and um, things just change, and so you have to kind of change with the times a little bit, and after we see that something has become common enough, or it's being enough of a thing for reviewers and players that we need to address it in the public facing guidelines, then that's where these updates, that's when it's a good time to try to do that.
Well, let's move on to the geocache containers, because that was another one that has come up a few times. There's been some clarifications now that it has to have a logbook, and the logbook is now defined. And so basically things like the flat magnets aren't allowed because the logbook has to be physical, replaceable, which, flat magnets wouldn't be. Easy to sign and enclosed within a container. So that totally blows the flat magnets out.
Well, the flat magnet is still possible if you have a replaceable log sheet on it. If it's just a thing where you're just writing on the magnet, then that wouldn't be cool, but it would still be possible to just do a magnet if there was a log sheet that could be replaced.
So, it has to be inside a bag or something on the back of the magnet.
No, it wouldn't have to be well, I guess I'd have to look into that one and see for sure. But it would be, I think it would still be possible to do it, but I'd have to look and see how that would be workable within the guideline.
Yeah, because the impression that I had after listening to some of the discussion was that because of the enclosed within a container, that would rule it out anyway. Because if you have the flat magnet where it's just the magnet with the sheet of, usually it's like a Write in the Rain paper on the back.
Mm-hmm.
That's, yes, you could replace that, but it's not enclosed within a container.
Yeah, I'm gonna look into that one, and while we're talking, and see if I can find anything more about it. But we can definitely come back to that if I'm able to find something worth saying.
You have your assistant there to help you do all this research, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. It's Ben Hewitt. He's at home looking up this stuff and just messaging me back and forth. Okay. That's basically what his job is to do stuff like that for me.
To help you. Yeah, of course.
Your research department.
Right.
But yeah, it goes into some of the other stuff that's really always been in there too, like label the container as a geocache, although that hasn't always been in there. That was, what, about 5 years ago, I think, that the was added to the guidelines. Does that sound right?
That maybe it was before my time at HQ, so that could be correct.
I think it's actually longer than that, because as if I remember, is as long as we were doing this show, that's been the case, and it's been 6 years that we've been doing this show.
Yeah, and and another thing about that, I mean, it does say that to do that where possible. There are going to be situations, obviously, where it might not be possible to label it as a geocache, but
like
part of the
containers.
yeah, but part of the reason that we do that is that after years and years of not just working with the community, but also working with law enforcement and land managers and what have you, we have found that one of the things that's just most helpful in allowing our game to be understood by muggles and people who aren't playing is if it is labeled as a geocache. So if we can at least get that information out to the community and have folks at least thinking about it where it's appropriate to be labeling it, that's kind of what we're trying to do with that kind of an addition to the guidelines.
Tech Magnet in the chat is saying that flat magnets have been rejected by the reviewers in his area for years.
Well, and again, I'm not going to be able to speak to how the reviews are handled in every territory. I mean, that's just one of the things about our game is that reviewers largely decide what's how to interpret the guidelines most appropriately for their areas, and so yeah, there definitely may be some. Your results may vary to some degree, but yeah, but it's obviously when you have a game that's played in over 180 countries, the guidelines can be interpreted slightly differently in different places.
Then shall we move on to the events and the location stuff that came up that kind of got people a little bit in a tizzy?
Sure, and again, I will answer as much as I can, but I will say I'm not the events expert. So if I can answer, I will. If I can't, I will say I can't, and I will try to get an answer for you. But events are kind of their own little, crazy spots sometimes. So let's see what I can do with what you asked me about.
Sure. Well, and the thing that really kind of got people going was that events cannot be held in or near transportation centers, and it now just lists the airports, cruise ship ports, and train stations. I believe when they originally did that, like bus stations had been included as well.
Yeah, I mean, airports and cruise ship ports, I mean, certainly with airports, what we were seeing that was problematic was that somebody wanted to host an event inside a terminal because they just wanted to get a new state, as they were flying through a place, or B, even if they had it outside the secured area, there's just it's relatively rare for an airport to be an ideal place to host an event. It's not a place that most of us go to unless we're traveling somewhere. Same thing with cruise ship ports. I mean, it's one of those things that usually you're there because you're on a cruise ship. It's not because you're a local who wants to, go to an event. Train stations is kind of a similar deal. And then there gets to be some security issues too certainly with airports. It becomes not as critical at the other places, but yeah, again, that was just one of those things that in talking with reviewers around the world, one of the things that was difficult for them with reviewing was trying to differentiate between, an event at this airport versus an event at this other one, and which one was okay and which one wasn't. And they wanted to have more clear guidance as to what was allowable and what wasn't. And what we found, generally speaking, and again, you can't say this 100% of the time, but most of the time, the those were not great places to hold events. And, that's why there ended up being some clearer guidance about those in the guidelines.
Yeah, and I think I've heard some stories about people still doing some of the train stations and the ports, because there's restaurants like right there that are open to the public, and if they've explained that in their reviewer notes, they've been able to get it through. But it's really, from what I understand, about the security concerns.
Well, certainly at airports, it definitely is. We've had enough instances where airport personnel have asked us to certainly not allow geocaches, but then even having events there where they've told us, they didn't feel good about that. We've had enough of, and again, I have to say that when we do these, when we consider these subjects, we're not just considering them for a single place or for a single region. We're looking at the entire world, and we're taking feedback from reviewers from, over 100 countries. And so you might look at your own area and say, well, it's not, we've got this little small airport at our place. Why is it a problem for us? Well, this guideline wasn't necessarily written with your place in mind. It's general guidance that's applies to an entire world. And so when you look at airports, for instance, generally speaking, hosting an event at an airport is, I think most of us would agree, at most airports is not a great idea. Is it possible that there's an airport out there where it would be okay? Yeah, possibly. But again, this is general guidance, and certainly from a security standpoint, as you mentioned, that is definitely an area of concern at places like transportation centers.
So my guess is, if you did have a restaurant or something that's in, that train station that you might want to hold an event, talk to the reviewer first and see if it is going to be acceptable.
Yeah, I mean, you can always talk to the reviewer. Because again, it's going to kind of depend on, I mean, we had a deal come through this last week, a situation with a quote unquote airport, where it was, somebody wanted to, actually, I want to say it was one of the new virtual rewards, and they wanted to place it fairly close to an airport, but it was clearly it wasn't anywhere near the terminal. It was at what it was essentially a public museum type of a thing with its own parking lot, and it was nowhere near secured areas or any of that stuff. And the airport was cool with it, and they had given their permission. So that's a situation where the person reached out to the reviewer and said, hey, here's my idea. I'm not sure that it's, I mean, judging by the letter of the exact letter of the guideline, that it would be cool, but here's the way the situation is playing out in this particular place. Is it something that we can work out? And so that's a little bit, different than if he was trying to place, even a virtual cache in the secured area of the terminal. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, talk to the reviewer and see if your particular situation is covered by this guideline, or if the reviewer feels like it should be handled differently.
Yeah, it always helps to talk with the reviewer before you do anything that you think might be an issue.
Oh yeah, we always, when people write into us and say, hey, I've got this idea, what do you think? They'll give us a paragraph and say, what do you think about this idea? We always go back and say, we can't pre-approve anything until we see it on a cache page. So write up the cache page, send it to the reviewer, say, here's what I'm thinking about. Haven't placed anything yet, haven't put it there, but here's what I'm thinking. What do you think? And then the reviewer can give you some guidance and say, yeah, maybe this is something you can move forward with, or no, I don't think this is going to work. You shouldn't waste your time.
Right. Yeah, and always make sure to give the reviewer all of the information, like, hey, we've talked to this person. here's their contact information. That really does make a difference.
Oh yeah, the more information, the better. That's always the case, and certainly if you have some permissions beforehand, that's helpful as well. Sometimes people will say, I've got this thing I want to do, I want to put it here, and I'm pretty sure I can get the management or the property owner to sign off on it, but I don't want to bother them until you tell me that it's okay. And that usually doesn't fly. I mean, we get why people want to do it that way, but certainly your chances of having something go smoothly improve a lot if you can give as much information as possible up front, including, hey, I've already talked to the person, they're cool with the general idea here, and here's their name and contact information in case it becomes relevant.
Yeah, no, we've gotten people pretty excited about hiding caches, only to discover that, yeah, there's a final too close to the door of their establishment where we were planning on hiding this box like under the bench, So
Sure.
I totally get how that's, you don't want to get them all excited until but you have to check before, So manage expectations. There you go.
That's right. That's right.
Well, we do have an email from Tick Magnet, and he says, "Hi, Chris, and Daryl. I've been thinking about DT ratings and old caches. Many of the old ones I found seem to be way underrated. Do you know when the system started or how it came and why it came about? Thanks, guys."
Yeah, so you had shared that with me beforehand, and so I had a chance to. I went to our keeper of old information, which is Mountain Bike, and we had a discussion earlier this week. And so the way it was explained to me, because I wasn't playing back then, I didn't start until 2011. But so when Jeremy first created the website, there was a DT scale right from the start. The first I guess 75 listings that were brought over to the site, they all defaulted to 1.1. So then the people who owned those caches could then go in and adjust the DT after they were on the site. But there in the beginning, even when there was a rating system, there was no guide to go along with it. So what did 5 terrain mean? What did 5 difficulty mean? There was nothing that went with the DT scale to explain or to give suggestions as to how you should rate the difficulty in terrain. So there started being discussions in the forums, and the user Clayjar came up with the basically the little test that you could do where you would he had a little web page that he created where you could go through and it would say, is it a hike of X amount? Is it do you need a boat or whatever to get to it? And you'd go through and you'd answer those questions, and then it would rate your cache for you. And so that system that he came up with was essentially the inspiration for the guide that is now part of our help center that suggests to people how they should rate their caches. So I think that I would just be speculating here, but I think that there's a couple ways you could look at it. One is that there was no guide in the early days, and up until, I forget what year John told me that was, but it was at least a few years after the site launched. There were at least a few years where there was no guide, and I would speculate that it was kind of left to people individually to decide, what did 2 terrain mean versus what does 4 terrain mean. And because of that, you're going to have a pretty wide spectrum of ideas as to your 2 terrain might be a whole lot different than my 2 terrain. And so I don't think there was as much uniformity as maybe there is today in terms of rating difficulty and terrain. Now, you also have some people that'll just say that the same people that said that they walked 10 miles to school in snow with shorts on, they're going to say that the caches back then were so much, these 4 terrain or 5 terrain caches that people say today, they were 2 terrain back in my day. They were 3 terrain. We didn't, it isn't nearly as hard as people are making it out to be. So maybe there's a mixture of those 2 things, but I personally think that it's probably more attributable to the fact that there just wasn't the same amount of guidance given in the early days as to how you should rate your cache.
Well, I think the original geocachers were just tougher people. Yes, they walked uphill in the snow.
Of course. Yeah.
To school both ways.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. But, they were also the hikers and the mountaineers where, this isn't a hard hike. It's 10 miles uphill, but, we do this every weekend. So
well, I think some of it. I think more of the uniformity has come in with now when you do the listings. It's only been 4, maybe 5 years that it's been on the listing pages where it gives you some guidance. So now people think about it a little bit more. And before that, it was a very regional situation. When I got started, it wasn't uncommon to have a local hider change the difficulty or in terrain ratings depending on the season.
Sure.
So it would move around. And that kind of started to become a no-no as people started to fill the grids. And so now they went to like a mean, which, is really tough if you have at times, can it flood?
Mm.
And the rest of the year it's, like a salt flat. Well,
yeah, right.
It's a 1-1 most of the time, but in that wet season, all of a sudden it becomes, a 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that we've talked about, just brainstorming and just talking, I don't know that anything like this would ever happen, but we thought wouldn't it be cool if you could have the CO defined terrain and difficulty, and you could have those numbers, but then maybe there was also essentially a crowdsourced difficulty and terrain alongside it, where each time you found a cache, you could rate it what you thought it was, and then you would kind of see what did the public think that the rating would be, and then it would average out over time. Like I said, I don't know that anything like that would ever happen. It might be interesting, and to see how that would, and then the COs could also see what does the public think about, how I've rated this cache.
No, that's a great idea, actually.
Sure.
Yet at the same time, there's some people who are going to define everything as a 5-5 because they want to fill their Gasmer grid.
Yeah.
Or their busy grid.
Grid, yeah. But you're also going to get the people who can't write logs right now who just don't bother rating. So.
Right.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It's one of those situations where you don't know what you're going to get, but the people who are probably the most interested are going to give you some good information.
Right. Yeah. And, we thought, we haven't thought this through at all. I'm totally just, it's not like we have
it's the discussion.
No, it's written in stone now. You have to.
Yeah. But kind of on the same line of thinking is looking at favorite points. And we thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting if in addition to favorite points, you could have like a cache rating where somebody rated, how cool they thought a cache was on a scale of, whatever. And there's pros and cons to that kind of stuff, but it's interesting to think about, crowdsourcing some of that information in a way that could potentially be interesting and helpful to not just the player, but to the cache owner as well.
Definitely. That's and that's all good ideas, and I would love to see it happen, but actually implementing that is going to be a challenge.
Yeah, that's exactly. It's easy.
Then get to work on it.
It's easy for it's easy for the non-developer like me to sit in the kitchen and be like, hey, what about this great idea? And yes, it's a great idea, but it isn't necessarily a top of mind best idea in front of these other 100 ideas.
Yeah, we can't devote the 1,200 hours right now to make that happen for you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is Bounce in the chat says he's never had a problem finding his own caches. They seem like a difficulty one to him.
Is that Bounce from
Tacoma
Bounce in
area.
Washington?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's some fabulous gadget type caches.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I've done a few of his caches down in South Seattle? Are there any down your way, Chris? Or are they all in South?
Yeah, there's
kind of
they're in my way. Yeah, Federal
Redmond
Way
and that kind of area. Okay. Yeah, some good stuff.
fabulous. He just won a couple of Travel Bug TBHOA awards. So, 5-star Travel Bug awards for his hotels. And
it sounds like they're easy for him to find, so that's positive.
I mean, he walks right up to him. Who knew? Okay, I have to admit there's a time or two I have not been able to find my cache. Only because it's not where I hit it.
Yeah.
Somebody decided, I think this is a better spot.
Remember I was just telling you about my cache that buried itself?
Yeah.
That took me almost an hour to find.
Yeah, I can imagine that would have been tough to...
That's when I wanted that Tupperware detector.
Yeah. How hard can it be?
Well, and it was such a nice spot when I put it there, because it was this little, like, not dugout, but little bowl. It was about 3-4 feet wide with a bunch of fallen trees and everything, right? When I came back there to find it, there was like big logs next to it, not little, trees or anything, big logs. And so, the terrain had totally changed. When I finally archived that cache, the container is still there under like a 3-foot wide tree, I think. The tree that was like, 2 down isn't there anymore.
Yep.
It's on the cache, near as I can tell.
Oh boy. I've often thought we need some sort of beacon in our own caches, like a tile or one of those little RFID beacons that, if you lose your keys, you can go put one of those in your own cache. If I need my cache, I can use my phone to find it. Make it beep for me.
Yeah, but it would only get you to within a certain... Yeah, I could even see myself that not even being enough for me. I had a deal, I guess it was in February or January. We were down in Florida, and I had just gotten this new Garmin watch, and it had like a find your watch function on it, that if you had your phone and you were within range or whatever. And so it was on this series of trails, and I was finding a lot of caches on the trails, and I got to this one cache, and I was carrying my phone and my GPS, and then I had my watch on. So I saw the cache, I set my phone and GPS on the ground. I went, opened the container, started signing it, and I looked down and I see these ants crawling up, like these fire ants crawling all over. So I disturbed their nest. And so I flipped out. I dropped my GPS, dropped my phone. I'm starting to do this, and I see him crawling on my watch. So I take the watch off and I throw it on the ground, and I'm doing this and doing this. And so anyway, I finally get everything settled down. Everything's fine. I get my phone, get my GPS, put the cache back, and I start running to the next cache. And I'm like a half mile away when I realized my watch was still back where I had thrown it. I went all the way back. I went back there, knew where the cache was. I mean, I had it in my Jeep, so I know I'm at the right place. I never found the watch.
Wow.
Ever. I never found it.
Carried away. It's underground in their lair.
They took it with them. They carried it away. So even I'm looking, I've got my phone out, I've got find my watch, and it didn't pick up anything. I'm like, I can't be any more than 20 feet away from it right now. And it's still, it was of no use to me at all. So yeah, not to rain on your idea, Chris. I'm sure it's
okay. Well, no, you.
And if anybody wants to go down to Florida and get a nice Garmin watch, it's probably still laying there in the sand. Well, actually, I think that area gets water it's probably underwater now, but during the winter it was just sandy, and the ants took it back to their home, I guess. So
well, you should put a note on the cache page, because
I did.
are good people. If they find it, they will actually return it to you.
I did. I'm sure that they
Okay.
would have. I don't think anybody else ever came about it. So I really think the ants took it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've actually had mega
work?
events where people bring GPSs back that they've found out on the trail. It's kind of amusing.
Yeah, I've lost a GPS before. As long as we're confessing stupid things that we've done, I think I'm the only one confessing it. But yeah, I actually drove off one time, had a GPS on the hood of the car or something. I drove away and didn't realize it until I got home. Drove all the way back. It was like an hour away from where I lived. Drove all the way back, and it wasn't there. I don't know what happened to it. I actually lost. I'm really confessing a lot here today. I actually lost. I went hiking. I don't know. It was about an hour outside of Seattle, hour and a half outside of Seattle, earlier this summer, and it was maybe a 5-mile round trip hike. And I went up the mountain. I'm coming back down. I'm almost to my car. I reach into my pocket, and my key is gone. And I'm like, what the heck? I'm wearing nice hiking shorts. I just bought them, really nice shorts. And what I put my hand down in my pocket, and the key had made a hole in the pocket, like it was kind of it was a mesh combination type of a fabric, and so the key at some point made a hole and fell out of my pocket. It was somewhere on the trail. I mean, there was no way I was ever going to find it, right? I mean, and so my wife had to drive an hour and a half out with a new key for me, you know. So
Wow.
If you guys want to confess anything, feel free. You know, at this point, I'm the only idiot of the three of us. But
Well, no,
I was
that's
gonna
not true.
I was going to say that sounds a lot like one of my stories with a Geocoin. I'm literally going like 5 feet from the car to the cache. It was like almost a park and grab, but it's up over this hill. And somewhere between the car and the cache, I lost one of 2 coins I was carrying that I was going to drop in this travel bug hotel. Went back and forth over that hill for like 20 minutes. I could not find that coin. Never did find the coin.
Well, the bright side of that, though, Daryl, is that the coin didn't cost you $200 to replace, like my car key did. So
no.
You know,
well, the closest thing.
Unless it was like a mountain bike rare. I mean, it wasn't, was it? It was.
No. I don't even remember what it was, but
it's lost.
The closest thing to that I probably had happen was the GPS that I lent to a fellow podcaster that never got back after his move. It couldn't find it, so I no longer have a. No, it wasn't you. I no longer have a Colorado 300.
Yeah,
which is kind of sad.
Palm Pilot, and I put it on top of the car while I was doing things and drove off. I got to where I was going, just a couple of miles away, and realized, oh, stink. Where I left it on top of the car. Went back, and it was in the first intersection I had turned in. It was in the middle of the intersection, still sitting there. And nice. I stopped, picked it up, wasn't broken or anything. Like, wow, how did it sit in the nobody ran it over. It just.
That's nice. That actually reminds me of, I was in, God, where were we? Oh, it was when we were in Montana in September, and we were in, were we in Kalispell? We were in Kalispell, I think, and we were caching, and we were driving from one place to another, and we were in a rental car, so it wasn't. So that's my excuse. I wasn't familiar with the equipment. So it was one of those cars that has one of those key fobs that you don't actually, put it into the
the push button start.
Yeah. So when I was at the last cache, I just had the keys on top of the car as I was signing the log. Forgot about them, got into the car, turned it on, started driving, and I don't know, about a half mile into it, we heard, I was like, God, did something just hit the car? And what had happened was the keys had fallen off the car and just made kind of a sound as they were making their way to the street. And it took 10, 15 seconds for that to occur to me as what had happened. But it was a really busy, like a very busy city street. And so we pulled over the first chance we got at a service station, and I just started running back towards and I got back and I see the key there in the middle of the road, and cars are flying past, and both through it, zoom, 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 zoom. And I'm just looking at it going, praying, please, nobody run over those. Because again, it's a rental car, and I don't know how much that would have cost. I'm sure a few $100s to probably replace those keys. And thankfully, nobody hit them, and I was able to get out into the street. And whew, that's
I'm surprised the car kept running, because most
I was
of those,
too.
if you get the key too far away, it shuts down as a safety thing.
Well, I thought the same thing, but then I also thought it's probably a safety thing that they don't just want it shutting down like I was on a busy street. I mean, if the car just would have shut down, that would have been a problem. Would have been a bigger problem.
I think it's supposed, depending on which car, obviously, but the original systems were supposed to give you like a 5-minute warning or something like that.
Oh, okay.
I don't think it's even that long.
That makes sense.
But yeah, the whole thing was, you don't want it goes into like valet mode.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They've gotten
those cars, and we've done that with the valet. You keep the key in your pocket. You never get it. So, we give it to the valet, and he drives it off, and it's like, I've still got the key. How are we going to get the car back? Oh, you got to give him the key.
But yeah, we've got that on the new car. It drives me insane because it's so slow.
What is?
The detection systems and everything. So like I'll pull into the parking lot and I have to put it into park, sit there for a couple of seconds, then hit the button. It won't turn off when you like put it into park and hit the button. It still keeps running.
Huh. Interesting.
My mother keeps the spare key in her purse, but you can't lock the doors with a key in the car.
Yes.
So she can never lock her purse in the car. She has to carry it with her. I'll just leave my purse in the car. You can't.
Wow.
It won't lock.
I never thought of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, and one of the other problems is I can't like lock the door with the spare keys in there if I'm like going to the dealer. I have to take this big bundle of keys to the dealer with me. All kinds of issues.
Now we're talking about cars.
Yes,
Okay, so
I was going to say we're so far off on this one.
I was geocaching in San Antonio and doing I can't remember if it was a multi-cache or a where I go. Multiple steps involved. And I got to the end. It was probably a good 5 miles from my hotel where the end was. And great. Found the cache, signed the log. I start heading back and I get back to my hotel and I realize I don't have my room key or my Fitbit. Well, it was a hot day in San Antonio, and taking my hands in and out of my pockets, the room key card stuck to my palm and it dropped very near the cache location. So I walked 5 miles back. There's the room key and Fitbit laying on the ground. I pick them up and walk 5, so I got good exercise that day.
None of which counted because you didn't have the Fitbit.
Yeah, I know, exactly. None of the, only, one of the 2 trips counted.
Yeah, it's just like if you didn't log a geocache in that state or in that country, you've never been there.
Exactly.
You don't have the Fitbit, you never walked it.
I know. Oh, I walked it, and I know it.
Yeah, your legs were telling you, for days after.
It was all flat ground, but it was hot. It was in the 90s, and I didn't want to walk that much. I didn't want to be outside anymore.
I'm thinking we're going to have a whole show just about the stuff that we've lost on the trail.
The losers of caching.
Yes.
Oh wait, that might not come out right.
The losses of caching. How's that?
I don't know. Last time we had Chris on a show, we came up with a whole donut theme. So, Chris, you're a good muse for us. Thank you.
Yeah. It's funny, the donut thing too, because the Geo Woodstock isn't too far from that donut Geo tour, I noticed. So
yeah, we were thinking exactly the same thing.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to make a run next May.
Yeah. Don't know how much time I'm going to be able to take off, but I definitely want to do that. It's only supposed to take about a day if you want to do it, but the thing that I'm always told is you have to make sure to do the official tour and the unofficial tour at the same time. The official one gets you the coin, but then there's an unofficial that will get you a t-shirt.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
So it's extra cool.
Nice.
Yeah. So if you're going to do that, let's try to connect and finally meet in person.
That would be awesome.
Back in April, and
that's right.
I got this again.
That would be fun.
Wet Coaster says we should do a show about the new guidelines.
That's a good idea. We'll have to do that someday.
Yeah, we'll come up with something like that. Yeah.
You know, there's just some days that you go for like an hour chit-chatting and
Chris, thank you so much for coming on and actually talking a little bit about the new geocaching guidelines, or should I say updated geocaching guidelines.
It's like I said, it's always a pleasure to come on and talk about geocaching and non-geocaching stuff.
And we'll have to get you on again.
Non-geocaching stuff. The new cars without a key. Anyway.
Right.
Oh man. Right. Okay. Did you catch Bounce's latest comment? Someone left their glasses in one of his caches. She said she was never so excited to log a cache so that she could get her glasses back. Oh, man, that would have to suck. All right.
So that would be pretty terrible.
From geocachers and put them in caches they haven't found. Here, if you want your car keys back, you have to go find this cache. It's in there.
Yeah, thanks for dropping that GPSR in this. This is the best swag I've ever had.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks again, Chris. It's been a pleasure. We'll have to get you on again for one of many shows coming up. But definitely we'll have to talk to you before the Giga event.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And patrons, thanks so much for your support of the show. It's getting close to the end of the month, so those charges are going to be hitting your cards any moment now. If it weren't for you, though, we couldn't continue to do those shows, or these shows, and all the bonus material.
And the others.
And the others. But I'm getting frazzled because it's like the end of the night, and it's been a very busy few weeks over here. So, Chris, why don't you tell us what the upcoming shows are that I've got scheduled?
I would love nothing more. Even though we have our muse, Chris Ronan, with us, we do come up with other shows on our own. And this next week, we're doing one of my favorite, a randomized show. November 9th, we're talking about batteries. That was our very first show, and we're coming back to it after 6 years. November 16th, we're talking all about travelers, and we're not talking about people, but rather coins and such, and bugs. November 23rd, we are talking with the folks from Geocaching Australia. So make sure you join us for that one, Nate.
Check the Cachamaniacs website at cachamaniacs.com for more on the GeoGearHeads, including show notes for this and all of our episodes. We love hearing from our listeners, so leave us feedback by emailing geogearheads@cachamaniacs.com or through social media. Your support helps keep the Cachamaniac shows coming. Please consider becoming a patron through the link on our website to support the Cachamaniac shows. GeoGearHeads is produced by Clint Offenauer and Daryl Wanberg. This show is copyright 2017 by Daryl Wanberg. All rights reserved.